With cancer at a Johannesburg hospital yesterday morning. Masinga was 49 years old. Can you believe it? So young. Details of his memorial and funeral service have not been released yet. The football fraternity continues to mourn the loss of the former Bafana striker and legend. He was a member of the class of '96 that won the country's only African Cup of Nations title. Former coach and mentor Jomosono described the striker as a rare talent. Safa says his death is a great loss to the country, and we're now joined in the studio by SABC sports journalist David Kekana. David, everybody wants to remember him by that goal, that legendary goal, but other people have said, a colleague of ours is saying this morning, he's the nicest man you could have ever come across, especially a man of his stature, but who could actually reach out to other people.
Yeah, Phil was a great man of stature, somebody who loved his colleagues. I mean, I remember when Sizwe Mutaung had his troubles, Phil made sure that he flew him to Italy when he was playing to make sure that he's with him and counseling. That was the type of man that Phil was, and somebody that was firm in his beliefs and could not waver when he believed in something. He was never a sellout. Somebody that when the players were standing out to management and they were saying that they needed something, he stood with them, specifically with the players that were playing locally, because he was one of those who was privileged to have played overseas at the time during the 1996 AFCON.
And successfully so.
And successfully so. I mean, somebody who raised the South African flag on an international level, playing for the clubs like Leeds United. I mean, I remember the Leeds United fans singing Waltzing Masinga in the stand. Waltzing Matilda, but because of Masinga, they were saying Waltzing Masinga after he had scored a goal for Leeds. And that is the stature of a guy who, I think, for South Africa, we failed him. We failed him a lot when he came back to South Africa, because we failed to provide adequate support behind Phil Masinga to make him the legend that he was. And I think in South Africa, we don't know how to make heroes. We don't know how to make heroes. And I'm hating as I sit here.
What will it take for that to come about?
I think when you look at it, there will be more Phil Masingas if we don't change how we deal with people that have made a contribution and people that can contribute to South Africa to make sure that the youth are empowered and the youth are helped. And we need to make sure that we provide adequate support. These guys were not learned. They used their skills to be where they are. They needed support to be able to open academies. Phil Masinga would have opened a strikers academy if we had adequately put enough support behind him.
So just this weekend, a story broke out of Leslie Sidibe, his submission to the police about a bribe that was facilitated by Denny Jordan. Massive amounts of money. Those kind of stories where money goes where it's not intended to go. What causes this? You've covered sports a bit, especially since 2010, when we were talking about these monies that were supposed to go into development but ended up elsewhere.
It's not only in sports. It's throughout South Africa as a nation. We continue to fail a lot of people in a number of ways. We're failing people, whether politicians, whether politicians from a sporting arena, because we don't use what we have adequately to support South Africans to make sure that South Africans improve in general. And we're talking about sports and monies that are supposed to be able to help players to make sure that the players support and they become as heroes. They become more heroes, and we glorify them in perpetuity because they can contribute to the nation and make sure that we have more stars that are coming through, and that is not being done. And I think that in a greater scheme of things, from a South African perspective, we have a long way to go, because AIDS is ravaging people across South Africa. Nyaupe and other drugs are killing people.
But it's interesting that you're talking about that,
and when
David,
the heroes that are supposed to be there to show kids how things are done are left to die as Phil Masingas have died. And it's a shame on South Africa.
David, let me just come in there. It's interesting that you're talking about that, and you talked about Sizwe
Yes.
at the beginning of your conversation. And Sizwe died in the 1990s.
Yes.
And when he died, we were having similar conversations that we're still having today, now that Phil Masinga has passed away.
Sizwe Motaung, Shoes Moshweu, Phil Masinga, who is next? I can tell you that it saddens me that all these stars that we're supposed to empower to make sure that they make a meaningful contribution and they continue to become stars. That's why our national team is not improving. We can't improve when we have our own heroes that we're supposed to make sure that they become stars and the youngsters look up to them. And then we cast them aside and we leave them to die without really honoring them as all nations do across the world.
Yeah.
Nations do that. In England, their players are supported. They put people behind them to make sure that these stars remain in the public domain and that they contribute, and that because they are stars, they've done what is necessary to raise the South African flag.
You've already touched on his time overseas. Let's just zone in on his time at Leeds and the kind of impact that he made. And we have a picture in the background, a beautiful picture of him with Lucas Radebe.
Yeah, you remember when he signed for Leeds, he was just an extra player. They wanted Lucas Radebe. And then they looked around and they took an extra player, somebody to make Lucas Radebe comfortable in England. With,
was
mate.
that the big story?
That was the big story.
Okay.
The guy that Leeds wanted was Lucas Radebe. But when they arrived there, Phil Masinga was scoring goals and he was doing very well. And from there,
so he made his own mark.
The only thing was that as a striker in England, it was very tough. It was very tough for him to really break it to the level because of the guys that he was competing with, the likes of Yabua of Ghana, who was a superstar at the point in time. Then they transferred him to St. Gallen in Switzerland to give him enough time to acclimatize to the European conditions. Whilst playing for St. Gallen and making it and scoring goals, that's where Salernitana saw him and wanted to sign him signed him for the Italian side. Yeah. He scored 16 goals for the Italian side before moving to Paris. I mean, this is the guy who scored 154 goals in 328 games throughout his career.
Oh, wow.
He scored...
What an achievement.
Yes, he played 58 times for Bafana Bafana and scored 18 goals. This is a hero. Behind the likes of Benny McCarthy, who scored more goals, is Phil Masinga, the guy that really delivered us. I mean, when I'm saying delivered us, scored that beautiful goal against Congo Brazzaville.
Yeah,
that
and
goal
you were able to qualify.
Even for years, in 200 years in South Africa, we'll still look at that goal as the goal that delivered South Africa to the first World Cup ever. The first soccer World Cup ever South Africa's qualified for. Phil Masinga delivered us with that goal.
How did he rate globally? How do you think, for instance, for argument's sake, English soccer lovers remember Phil Masinga?
Look, they remember and rate him very high as a striker, somebody who was combative, very big and strong. And at the time, he made English teams to really look at African players and say, you know what, we need to sign more. Him and Tony Yeboah at Leeds United were great ambassadors of the African continent, specifically from a striking perspective, to show that black African players can play in the English Premier League and strikers per se. And it was very rare at the time for strikers to be playing. We know of Peter Ndlovu, who is amongst a few first players to play in England from the southern region, which is South Africa, from Zimbabwe. But he was a winger. He was very quick. Phil Masinga and Yeboah were strikers, and they scored beautiful goals.
What will be his legacy?
His legacy was never really written. We missed a chance to really create a guy and make him to be something else. I think his legacy would have been there had we created a Phil Masinga striking academy. That would have been his legacy, because he showed us how to strike a ball. I remember a goal he scored against Zaire for South Africa, crucial goal during that qualifier with Dr. Kumalo, Dr. Damit. And
that's a necessary skill in South African football right now.
Yes, we were under pressure even then against Zaire, and he scored a beautiful header again there in Zaire. Phil Masinga was a naturally born striker that we had to, in South Africa, to glorify. And we failed.
David, thank you so much for making the time.
My pleasure.
To come through this morning to tell us about your friend and a soccer legend, Phil Masinga. Now we're inviting you to call us on 011-714-6841. If you're calling from outside of the country, you can use the code *27. And our question of the day that we're asking you, how do you remember Bafana legend Phil Chipa Masinga?